I think we have our judges for today. Our judges are going to be Dr. Avinash Ingole, Dr. Venkatesh Ambarkar, and Dr. Abhijit Tagare. We are in the Paranspe Hall, and it so happens that Dr. Paranspe is from Sangli, the place that I am from, and it gives me great pleasure to be talking in his hall. And let's start with the free paper session 6. The topics, we'll start with Dr. Priyanka Patil. Is she present? Dr. Priyanka? Okay. We'll go ahead with the next speaker, Dr. Shilpi. Is she here?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
sir. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, Dr. Shilpi. She's going to be presenting a paper for stage 4 NVG management in PDR.
Yes.
So, yeah, Dr. Shilpi, please go ahead.
Yes. Is my screen visible?
Yes, it is visible.
So, good afternoon, everyone.
Just a moment.
Yeah.
You have 6 minutes. And
What's up?
you have 6 minutes to present.
Yes,
and
sir.
2 minutes for any question answers.
Sure,
and some marks are there for you to finish your paper in time.
Yes, sir. Yes,
So
sir.
everybody, please be careful.
Shall I start, sir?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity. This study was conducted in our institute to assess the efficacy and superiority or equivalence of 2 management strategies in stage 4 NVG secondary to PDR. In NVG, fibrovascular proliferation leads to closure of anterior chamber angle, that is stage 4. PDR-associated NVG is approximately seen in 21% of the cases, which is usually bilateral and more common in type 1 diabetes. Clinically, patient has raised IOP with corneal edema and NVAs with closed angle. Besides treating the systemic diseases, reduction of inflammation and IOP, along with definitive treatment in form of treating ischemia, is the core principle of treatment. And the principles remain same for stage 4. But the challenges in stage 4 is that IOP does not come down in majority of the cases in spite of maximum medications, which makes the definitive treatment of VEGF surge, that is lasers, impossible because of corneal edema and the inflammation leading to further worsening. This vicious circle leads to loss of precious time, thereby further irreversible damage to optic nerve. Two-step approach in this paper showed 53% success at 6 months, while single-step approach showed success rate of 100% in this case series. Also, the need of vitrectomy after trabeculectomy increases the chance of bleb failure. The aim of our study was to compare the 2 management strategies, that is, single-step versus two-step approach in stage 4 NVG. This prospective interventional study was done in 16 eyes for stage 4 NVG secondary to PDR. In group 1, patient received aggressive PRP and 2 to 3 weeks later, trabeculectomy with MMC preceded 3 days before with intravitreal injection of bevacizumab. While in group 2, patient was directly taken for combined surgery after intravitreal bevacizumab. In group 2, after making phonics-based conjunctival flap, MMC was kept and thorough wash was given. Partial thickness scleral flap was created. AC wash was given in view of hyphema. Corneal epithelium was scraped to increase the posterior view. 23 gauge vitrectomy with aggressive post PRP done up to the ora serrata. Kelly sponge used to create the inner window. Scleral flaps and conjunctiva was sutured. While in group 1, but for vitrectomy, the steps of TRAP remained the same. Now coming to results and discussions. 4 patients in group 1 and 3 in group 2 had previous inadequate lasers few months back elsewhere. All 8 patients received aggressive or fill-in PRP in group 1. Mean pre-op IOP was 42.75 and 43 in group 1 and 2 respectively, and were on 2.88 AGM in group 1 against 3 in group 2. The reduction in IOP in both the groups across 6 months was statistically significant with p-value of less than 0.0001. Mean reduction achieved was 20.5 in group 1 versus 26 in group 2. Need of AGM was reduced from 2.88 to 1.38, that is 1.5 in group 1, while from 3 to 0.88, that is 2.13 in group 2. This means the overall reduction in IOP was more in group 2 with more decreased need of AGM post-operative. More than 4 lines improvement was seen in 5 patients in group 2 versus only 1 patient in group 1. In group 2, preservation of disc was seen in 7 patients, while it was just in 4 patients in group 1. This all means that in group 2, early definitive intervention prevents significant loss of optic nerve fibers, which happens because of raised IOP in the intervening period between the two-step approach. The incidence of transient complications were almost similar in both the groups. Failure of TRAP was seen in 2 cases in group 1. Complete and qualified success in terms of IOP reduction was similar in both the groups. KM plot reveals early reduction with sustained lower IOP at 6 months in group 2. To summarize, at 6 months, TRAP success was 75% in group 1. Mean IOP was 17 mm in combined group with need of average 0.88 AGM versus 22.5 mm with 1.38 need of AGM in group 1. Gain in vision was more in combined group. These are the pre and post surgery pictures, slit lamp and fundus photographs. To conclude, single step approach is more effective in controlling IOP with need of lesser AGM and with better visual outcomes. Group 1 had poorer anatomical and physiological outcomes as the delay of further 3 weeks caused more natural progression of disease, and prolonged increased IOP led to further optic nerve damage. Limitations of a study were the small sample size and shorter duration of follow-up. Thank you.
Hello.
Yeah, sir. Please go ahead.
Dr. Amey, should I ask?
Yeah, sir. Floor is open to the judge.
Yeah, Dr. Shilpi, it was a very good presentation, but trabeculectomy success in long term is not as good as we compare to the anti-glaucoma valves, Ahmed valves especially, or Bedwell's valve.
Yes.
So as you said, yes, currently it was a 6-month follow-up, but in long duration, I think you should have studied like this. One group undergoing TRAB and one group undergoing shunt operation. So I think that will be this, because TRAB itself, they are saying, so success rate of TRAB in such complicated cases is not even 50% after the span of 1.5 years or 2 years. So what's your opinion?
Yes, sir. So yes, you are right. But as a first step procedure in acute cases or with the patients presenting with less duration of symptoms, the first line of treatment what we use is trabeculectomy at our center. For chronic cases, we keep the Ahmed glaucoma valve as a rescue therapy.
Yes, and it's not a small sample size, doctor. Remember, it's a good sample size. 16 cases is not such a complicated span. It's definitely a good size of numbers in setup, like what you said. But yes, it was a good thing. But it's another thing. The operating surgeon was the same or different surgeons for different. Same. So that is more important. Yeah, same surgeon, because surgical hand is also another thing in so many complicated things. They may happen if they are a different surgeon. So it's a single surgeon, you said.
So for single means for trabeculectomy, it was the same surgeon, and the vitrectomy in the combined group was done by the retina specialist.
That's what I said. I know, but that's why the retina surgeon also and both the surgeons, they are same for both the groups.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes. Okay, doctor. Good.
Any other comments, Dr. Venkatesh?
No. I want to ask you a question. In the video, you have shown that while doing trabeculectomy, there is a hypema.
Yes, sir.
So that is because of the neovascularization of the iris. But suppose you give anti-VEGF agents before the surgery and reduce the amount of vascularization. Would not that have been the better approach rather than doing a trabeculectomy and getting hypema during surgery?
So we have already injected in both the groups bevacizumab 3 days before, prior to the surgery.
Okay. Okay.
Yes,
Another question.
yes,
Have you done peripheral aortomy in all these cases? Because there is
Yes,
when
sir.
there is extensive neovascularization, some people avoid PI. So
No, sir,
you had done.
We do.
That's why. As doctor asked you the question, Dr. Avinash. So that's why. If after doing PI, even in after VGF, after doing PI, you get hyphema on table. So that's why I said, if you are doing PI in all cases, then hyphema is bound to happen in some cases. Okay. So.
Okay. We'll go ahead with the next speaker. Is Dr. Priyanka Patil ready?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Ma'am, in free paper session, coming on time is a major, gives you major marks.
Actually, I had some technical issues, sir. I had joined.
No issues, no issues. Please go ahead with your presentation.
Yes, sir. So today, the topic of my presentation is pars-plana vitrectomy versus pars-plana vitrectomy with scleral buccal band in primary rhegmatogenous retinal detachment. Retinal detachment is defined as a condition in which there is separation of the neurosensory retina from the underlying retinal pigment epithelium. Rhegmatogenous retinal detachment is the most common type of RD and is characterized by a break in the neurosensory retina with seepage of vitreous fluid into the subretinal space. Incidence of the same is 17.9 per 1 lakh population. Surgical repair in order to restore the contact between the neuroretina and the retinal pigment epithelium is the only treatment for RRD. Surgical techniques have improved remarkably over the last decade with final anatomic success rate of around 80% in 1980s to nearly 100% in the last decade. The goal of surgery for retinal reattachment is to treat all retinal breaks and relieve vitreous traction. So, scleral buckling works by relieving radial vitreous traction. The introduction of pars-plana vitrectomy revolutionized the surgical repair of retinal detachment. It allows relief of vitreous traction, removes vitreous opacities, improves intraoperative visualization, and allows the use of tamponade. The aim of the study is to study the single surgery anatomic success rate of pars-plana vitrectomy and pars-plana vitrectomy combined with scleral buccal band to compare the single surgery anatomic success rates of the two groups. Inclusion criteria were patients with a primary RRD repaired by either PPV or SPV PPV, age more than 18 years, follow-up of minimum 6 months, and patients willing to participate in the study. The exclusion criteria were prior retinal detachment repair, pneumatic retinopexy, prior vitrectomy, proliferative retinal vascular diseases, giant retinal tears and severe dense vitreous hemorrhage, aphakia, lensectomy and intraocular lens with vitrectomy, other intraocular surgeries 90 days prior, endophthalmitis and prior posterior uveitis, intraocular foreign body, and ocular trauma. 17 eyes of 17 patients were studied for a period of 18 months. It is a prospective randomized observational study. All participants underwent detailed examination. Pre and post-operative assessments included visual acuity, refraction, slit lamp examination, IOP, fundus examinations. 8 patients underwent pars-plana vitrectomy and 9 patients underwent pars-plana vitrectomy with scleral buccal band. The surgery was performed using 3-port 23G trocars with assistance of non-contact wide-angle viewing system, reticare vitrectomy system, and endolasers were used. Scleral buccal, that is encircling 2240 band, was used in PPV SBB. Intraocular tamponade agents like C3F8 and silicone oil was used, and 23G sclerotomy was sutured with 80 vital sutures if leak was suspected. Post-operative ocular examination was recorded on 1 week, 1 month, 3 month, and 6 month, and the most recent follow-up. 17 results were as follows. 17 consecutive eyes of 17 patients were studied. 8 patients underwent PPV and 9 patients underwent PPV SBB. Following observations were made. The mean age of patients in PPV group were 57 years and that of PPV SBB groups were 59 years. The mean best corrected visual acuity at time of presentation in PPV group was 1.74 logMARs, and that in PPV SBB group was 1.64 logMARs. The number of patients with lattice degeneration, inferior breaks, multiple breaks, and macular off were similar in both the groups. But the retinal breaks visualized were less in PPV SBB group, and proliferative vitreoretinopathy was seen more in PPV SBB group. Intraoperative characteristics. All surgeries were done using 23 gauge trocars, and retinal breaks were lasered in all cases. Gas tamponade was used in both the groups at around 62 to 66% of patients, and silicone oil was used in about 33% of patients. Retinal breaks were lasered in all the cases. The visual acuity improvement and stabilization in both the groups are similar, and the preoperative and postoperative visual best corrected visual acuity in both the groups are also similar. Anatomical success, the single surgery surgical anatomical success were similar in both groups. In PPV group in 87.5% and PPV SVB group in 80.8%. There was no significant difference between the both. There was no difference in the final anatomical success in both groups too. 11.1% patients in PPV SVB group went under reoperation, and in 12.5% patients in PPV group went under reoperations. Discussion: the mean age of patients in PPV was 57 years, and that of PPV SVB group was 59 years. Patients presented with similar preoperative mean best corrected visual acuity in both groups. Mean best corrected visual acuity recorded at last follow-up in both groups did not show much difference. Similar results are seen in a study by Lindsell, LB et al. Single surgery anatomic success was similar in pars plana vitrectomy 87.5% and pars plana vitrectomy with scleral buckling group 88.8%, and final anatomic success was 100%. Study conducted by Lindsell, LB et al. Had similar results with single surgery anatomic success in PPV group by 85% and PPV with SB group by 83%. The final anatomic success was 100%. Vishal et al. Also had similar results with single surgery anatomical success in primary PPV group with 92.6% and primary PPV SB group with 94%. Both groups obtained 100% final reattachment rate. Conclusion: no difference was seen in single surgery anatomical success or final anatomical success between PPV alone or when compared with PPV combined with a scleral buccal band in the repair of primary RRD. There was no difference in the last follow-up of best corrected visual acuity comparing PPV with PPV SB in the repair of primary RRD. These are my differences. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. The floor is open for the judges. Venkatesh, sir.
No, nothing. It was a good presentation, and let Abhijit sir.
Avinash, sir.
Not a retina surgeon, but I just want to ask one small question. When you do a pars plana vitrectomy and along with you do scleral buckling, would it not be possible? It's slightly technically difficult procedure because the eyeball becomes slightly, there is hypotony there. Just as a lay person, I'm asking, not an ophthalmologist.
So yes, it becomes a little bit complicated, but certain cases need both of them.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Priyanka. We'll now go ahead with the next speaker. Is Dr. Kalpana Ingre present?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Dr. Kalpana, please switch on your video and you can go ahead with your presentation.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. My topic for paper presentation is management and visual outcome in patients of phacolytic glaucoma at tertiary eye care hospital. Lens-induced glaucoma, which affects the function of optic nerve due to rise of intraocular pressure, is a secondary glaucoma, either angle closure, that is phacomorphic, or open angle, phacolytic. It is one of the leading preventable cause of blindness if taken care in time. The occurrence of lens-induced glaucoma is a frequent event in India due to population explosion, increased life expectancy, and low productivity in terms of utilization of available surgical devices. While the cataract process is quite slow, once the lens becomes hypermature, phacolysis can develop rapidly. Preoperative and postoperative morbidity is more in phacolytic glaucoma than in simple uncomplicated cataract. Prognosis and visual outcome also affected if not diagnosed early. Hence, timely intervention is important in achieving good result. So the study is conducted to analyze the clinical presentation and management to minimize intraoperative and postoperative complications of phacolytic glaucoma. Objectives of my studies were to study the visual outcome after planned manual SICS and to study the preoperative and postoperative intraocular pressure changes following SICS in phacolytic glaucoma. It was hospital-based prospective study and study period was November 2019 to May 2021. Sample size was 30 cases of phacolytic glaucoma were studied. Inclusion criteria for my study was patient with phacolytic glaucoma willing to give written consent with age more than 40 years, and exclusion criteria were not willing to give written informed consent, phacomorphic glaucoma, phacotoxic uveitis glaucoma, ectopia lentis, primary glaucoma associated with cataract, traumatic cataract, and other secondary glaucomas. A detailed history, visual acuity, a slit lamp examination, anterior segment examination, IOP, fundoscopy, gonioscopy, when possible, were done. Phacolytic glaucoma differentiated from other glaucoma cases. B-scan was done as the fundus was not visible to rule out posterior segment pathology. In symptomatic patients, medical management was given to decrease inflammation and control of intraocular pressure. IV mannitol and tablet acetazolamide started to control intraocular pressure and topical steroid to control inflammation. After obtaining informed consent and explanation of relatively guarded prognosis, the patients were subjected to lens extraction under local anesthesia by small incision cataract surgery. Cases were periodically followed up to 6 weeks for visual outcome and intraocular pressure. The results of my study was, out of 30 patient study, majority of cases were in age between 66 and 75 years. Females were more as compared to males. 16 cases presented within first week and 11 cases within 1 to 2 weeks after the onset of symptoms. 17 cases presented with IOP more than 40 millimeters of mercury and 13 cases with IOP less than 40 mm of Hg. Out of 30 cases, 22 underwent manual SICS with PCI implantation. 5 cases had plain lens extraction and was later planned for SFIL implantation, and rest cases underwent manual SICS with surgical PI. In the study, mean intraocular pressure preoperatively was 40.7 mm of Hg with plus minus 5.34, and final intraocular pressure postoperatively was 15.96 mm of Hg plus minus 1.75. Most of them, that is 97% of cases, had intraocular pressure between 10 to 21 mm Hg postoperatively and at the end of 6 weeks. Out of 16 cases presented within 1 week, 6 cases had good base corrector visual acuity, while 9 cases had useful vision. Out of 11 cases presented in 1 to 2 weeks, 7 had useful vision and 4 had moderate vision, and all 3 cases who presented after 2 weeks had poor vision. Out of 16 cases, intraocular pressure less than 40 mm of Hg shows good best corrected visual acuity at the end of 6 weeks, and 14 cases with intraocular pressure more than 40 mm of Hg. 5 cases had good best corrected visual acuity, 6 had useful vision, and 3 had poor vision who presented after 2 weeks. In our study, mean age of this presentation was 61.63 years plus minus 9.45, ranging from 45 years to 78 years, and most frequent age group was 66 to 75 years. Female constituted 67%, while male were 33%. Ratio being 1.8:1, which may be due to the social and cultural constraints. Most of the cases presented within 1 week of onset of duration of symptoms, who is having good best corrected visual acuity postoperatively at the end of 6 weeks. All patients underwent manual SICS after control of intraocular pressure, and all shows good visual acuity. Visual acuity and intraocular pressure at the end of 6 weeks of follow-up done, which shows 70% had good best corrected visual acuity and controlled intraocular pressure between 10 to 21 mm of Hg. 30% cases who presented late, that is more than 2 weeks, and IOP more than 40 mm of Hg had poor vision. It shows that visual recovery and controlled intraocular pressure following surgery depends on early diagnostic intervention and proper management. Also, proficient postoperative management and follow-up probably achieve excellent visual prognosis. Conclusion of my study was, our study highlights that lack of awareness in rural population about early treatment of cataract leads to phacolytic glaucoma. Cataract should be treated before it goes in maturity, hence need of education of patient about dangers of it and poor visual outcome.
The time is up, doctor.
Hello.
Yeah, please go ahead. Make your point and we can finish.
Our study shows that manual assessment is safe and effective treatment for phacolytic glaucoma, producing good visual outcome. As 60% were pseudophakic, best to counsel them about timely surgery in second eye at the time of discharge after first eye surgery. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. I'll start with the first question. How did you differentiate between the morphic and lytic? Do you have any evidence to show that it was not morphic itself which had anterior segment inflammation?
Sir, in phacolytic glaucoma, the anterior chamber depth, in phacomorphic glaucoma, the anterior chamber depth is shallow as lens is put forward. And in phacolytic, it is not like that. In phacolytic is hypermature cataract, and in phacomorphic, it is intumescent cataract.
Okay, no, agreed. Sometimes sudden rise in the intraocular pressure, even in phacomorphic, can give rise to inflammation in the anterior chamber. So, do you have any anterior segment OCT to show that the angles were
Yes,
open?
angle.
Still, it had phacolytic glaucoma?
No, sir.
Because phacolytic is rare. You
Yes,
showed
sir.
us 30 cases you have
30,
in.
yeah, it's,
The Tagare sir is here, sir.
yeah, I said it's a rarity nowadays. Phacomorphic we see, but phacolytic very rarely.
Phacomorphic
And yeah, phacomorphic, yeah, yes, because. And another thing, have you, Dr. Ingre, have you
Yes.
examined the other eye properly? Because to rule out pseudo-explosion glaucoma, for example,
Yes, sir.
because other eye, I'm talking about the other eye.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Because you cannot say whether it is open angle glaucoma, closed angle, means angle is open, it's a phacolytic, but whether the pre-existing glaucoma is there or not. So you have to examine the other eye. Na?
Yes, sir.
Have you examined the other eye
Yes,
or
sir.
not?
Yes, sir.
All the patients.
Yes, sir.
Because what you said is sometimes we get CRVO or some other retinal complications. What was the reason for? You said some 3 patients they didn't improve after surgery.
Yes,
So
sir.
what was the reason? Like fundoscopy you have done on all these patients, post-op.
Yes, sir. Fundoscopy was done and it was normal, sir.
No, but then why the vision was not improved? That's my question. Because you understood, na?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
If duration is more than 2 weeks, what you mentioned, the duration of symptoms more than 2 weeks,
Yes,
those
sir.
patients, they did not improve.
Yes,
So
sir.
3 patients.
Yes,
So
sir.
why they didn't improve? That is my question. So what was the pathology? Whether the pathology was there in the optic nerve or retina or macula. So that's why fundoscopy, OCT, is it not? Am I right or not?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So because why the vision is because see phacomorphic glaucoma, yes, you can say it's a patients okay, other long associated glaucoma, other eye is having glaucoma, then we can say yes, the vision is not improved. But phacolytic, if it is within 1 or 2 weeks, the patient should improve, na?
The patient
So
vision was improved, but comparative to other patient, it was not that satisfactory.
No. It's not like that. Not comparison. We are talking about visual acuity post-operatively, not comparison to the other doctor. Don't misunderstand. There are 2 different things.
Yes, sir.
So post-operatively, as I said, you have to do gonioscopy, as Dr. Amey said. You have to do gonioscopy in these patients. If cornea is too hazy or patient is very uncooperative, okay, in those cases you cannot do, agreed. But ideally, what other eye you should do? That's what Dr. Amey was pointing out. Na? So you should have done gonioscopy of the other eye. You should have mentioned that the other eye gonioscopy was also performed. Other eye tension applanation was done. Other eye fundus was examined in those patients to rule out primary glaucoma. You understood, na?
Yes, sir.
So that is what I am focusing. So
Yes, sir.
Ma'am, is this your thesis?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so whenever we are talking about thesis, please do not use terms as poor vision, moderate vision. These are not internationally accepted. You have to give us what exactly the vision was and better give it in logmar.
Okay,
Never
sir.
is fine, but you cannot say in your thesis or in a paper that you're presenting that the visual recovery, some patients had good vision, then somebody had poor vision. These are not terms that we use. So you'll have to improve on that.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
anyways, Doctor, congratulations for such a large number of phacolytic glaucoma cases. Kudos. And Dr. Harish is your teacher, huh? Right, sure.
Yes, sir.
He's your teacher?
Yes, sir.
Huh?
Yes,
Okay. No
Small
issues.
thing I want
Yes.
to ask, you did so many cases, but you have not mentioned about post-operative complications because in the paper you have mentioned only about how many people the intraocular pressure reduced. But certain complications like uveitis in such cases is very common. It's very important to make it more realistic. How many people did develop complications apart from not reduction of the intraocular pressure?
And I would like to add another point. In less experienced hand, in phacolytic glaucoma, there are so many cases we have nucleus drops. Like Argentine flaxen is common in phacolytic glaucoma. So that is post intraoperative complications are very, very, very common in phacolytic as compared to phacomorphic. So it's a good thing that they didn't have any drop nucleus. So only thing they had some aphakic patients they said, but I don't know. That's why, as you said, some patients they didn't put IOL. So must be nucleus drop or they didn't do IOL. So I don't know. Right, no?
Yes, sir.
Huh? So
Yes,
there was no nucleus drop, na? In such patients.
Sir,
Some 6 patients you didn't put IOL.
patients were put for SFL. There were
That's what I'm saying. So those patients means there was no nucleus drop, na, in those cases. Nucleus drop.
Yes, sir.
No, I'm not following.
Hello.
What Dr. Avinash Ingole was asking was about the complications, because in such cases, phacolytic glaucomas complications are very high. Intraoperative and postoperative complications are very high. So regarding that, I was asking, while doing surgery, were there any incidents of drop nucleus?
No, sir.
No drop nucleus, because you said 6 patients you didn't do IOL, you did SF IOL. So that's why we are asking why SF IOL. So no nucleus drop.
Yes, sir.
Should we go ahead, sir?
Yes, please. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ingray ma'am. This is what happens when you present an anterior segment paper to 3 anterior segment judges. So we'll go ahead with Dr. Uttara Pandit.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
please switch on your video and share the screen.
Yeah, just a minute. Yeah. Is my screen visible?
Yes, ma'am, it's visible. Go ahead, please.
Yes. Good afternoon, one and all. Today, I would like to present my paper on fundus autofluorescence in diabetic macular edema. India is home to 69.1 million diabetic patients, of which 27% have some form of diabetic retinopathy, and 14% of these diabetic retinopathy patients have vision-threatening diabetic macular edema. Slit lamp biomicroscopy has been the gold standard for diagnosis of macular edema. However, newer imaging modalities such as OCT and fundus autofluorescence are also available nowadays. Fluorophores such as lipofuscin and melanin in the retina were found to emit light when excited by suitable wavelengths, and the distribution of these molecules have been studied, which indicate retinal damage at a cellular level. The aim of my study was to study the fundus autofluorescence patterns in diabetic macular edema, with the main objective to determine and classify these patterns obtained in diabetic macular edema patients proven on OCT. The study was an observational study carried out in the ophthalmology department in a tertiary hospital in Pune from October 2019 to September 2021. And a total 39 patients were enrolled in the study, of which 70 eyes were studied. All diabetic patients above the age of 18 years with macular edema proven on OCT were included in the study, and any patient who has received previous retinal treatment such as laser photocoagulation, vitrectomy, or intravitreal steroids, patients with significant media opacities, other causes of macular edema, and diabetic patients below the age of 18 years were excluded from my study. After a written informed consent, all the patients enrolled in the study underwent a complete ophthalmic evaluation, and using a Topcon 3D OCT Mastro, the central macular thickness using an ETDRS grid was measured, and a thickness of 212 plus or minus 12 microns was considered as macular edema in the study, after which color and fundus autofluorescence images were captured using a Topcon mydriatic non-mydriatic retinal camera. The images obtained on the retinal camera were then analyzed and classified into various patterns as normal, single spot increase pattern, a cystoid increase pattern, and an irregular decrease pattern. A total calculation and summation of these the various patterns were calculated. Of the 39 patients studied, 24 were males and 15 were females. Of the total 73 eyes that were there enrolled in the study, 35 eyes had a cystoid increase pattern, that is 47%. 26 eyes had a single spot increase contributing to 35%, and 12 eyes had diabetic macular edema on OCT. However, they showed normal autofluorescence, which was 16% of the sample size. As seen in this chart here, it was found that the cystoid pattern was most commonly associated in cases of severe NPDR as well as in PDR, whereas a single spot increase was seen in cases of moderate NPDR, mild NPDR, and patients with no DR in the fundus showed a normal FAF pattern. Delore et al. First explained emissions across a broadband spectrum from 500 to 800 nanometers as fundus autofluorescence, and he found that this originated from the retinal pigment epithelium. Various other studies, such as a study in Milan, Italy, showed that fundus autofluorescence and OCT gave a positive correlation between the cystoid increase pattern on fundus autofluorescence and the degree of the cystoid macular edema present. Various other studies have also found correlations between the patterns obtained and the severity of diabetic retinopathy. In our study, autofluorescence was found to be more common in diabetic males with an average duration of diabetes of 5 years or more, and the cystoid increase pattern was the most common pattern found, correlating to moderate and severe types of diabetic retinopathy, thereby suggesting a role of the amount of lipofuscin deposition in contrast to a normal fundus autofluorescence pattern that was seen in cases of mild or no diabetic retinopathy. In conclusion, the retinal pigment epithelial function can be monitored at a cellular level with the potential to halt the disease progression in the earlier stages. Since no pupillary dilatation is required for fundus autofluorescence, it provides a quick alternate method to prolonged OPD procedures. Large populations can be screened in a short span of time, and fundus autofluorescence can also be thereby used as an effective non-invasive technique to detect diabetic macular edema, hence aiding in early treatment protocols. These are my references, and thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. The floor is open to the judges. I have a small question. You yourself mentioned in the conclusion that a large population can be screened with this. Why do you have only 70 sample size when you're taking all diabetic patients above 18?
Actually, I have only included patients with diabetic, I have not considered clinically significant macular edema and all diabetic patients. I have only included patients proven on OCT with diabetic macular edema.
Okay. Sir, any comments? Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
We'll go ahead with the next speaker. Is Dr. Anuj Soni here? Yeah, I think he started.
Yeah.
Please go ahead, Dr. Anuj.
Yeah, so I'll be speaking on the topic of AREDS and the market. This is a survey of nutraceuticals and their adherence to the AREDS formula. So basically, whenever we are in OPD, we are bombarded with a lot of information about nutraceuticals. They range from all shapes and size, and they make all sorts of claims that this is best and that is best, this is veg, this is non-veg, and this is proven and that is not. So how do we decide? Because this is what we are left in a desk and we don't know what to prescribe to our patients. So basically, AREDS or age-related eye disease study was a study which proved that giving antioxidants, vitamins, and zincs help in reducing the incidence. And they did a lot of studies and a lot of publications, and a formula was prescribed, which was followed by AREDS 2, where lutein and zeaxanthin replaced beta carotene, and they also checked omega-3 fatty acids, and they found that there was no role of adding omega-3 fatty acids. So with this, we went ahead, and basically what we did was prepare a list of all the nutraceuticals with their contents, and this sample was made, which was given by all the representatives from the pharmaceuticals to us. And basically we compared it with the original AREDS formula. So to our surprise, the results was as expected. None of the brands could provide the formulation with the original AREDS concluded with a single dose. But not to be disappointed, as the top one is the original AREDS 2 dose and the below one is the AREDS 1 dose, we found that 3 brands, the Oculex, Vicolux and Oxyview, Ocubless, could provide this with a BD dosing. We found that 9 brands had all the contents which are mentioned in the AREDS formulation, but they are in insufficient quantity. That means even if you give it BD, you cannot give it as a AREDS formulation. Secondly, the most common thing which was insufficient was vitamin C and vitamin E. Then we compared with, we found that AREDS 1 was very less popular among the pharmaceuticals, and only 2 brands had beta carotene, and that also was in insufficient quantity. So basically this is how a Vicolex pharmaceutical representative would come to us, and it is the one which contains all the formulation, whereas ELAS would be an insufficient one, and same way would be an eyesight. So next what we did was we found which is the most commonest material, and as everyone knows and it is on everyone's mind, it was lutein, which was present in all the brands. So there was no brand which did not have lutein. Then we went on to see what is the constituent concentration of zinc. So the original formulation had 80 milligram, but later they found that a reduced dose also could help, because there was a paradoxical reaction seen with zinc in some cases with complement factor H. So we found that there were 3 concentrations which were common, though AREDS 2 did not prove that a lower concentration would help or not, but all of them may work. Then we found out that omega-3 fatty acid, even though AREDS 2 said that it does not make any difference, 5 of the brands included omega-3 fatty acid. And astaxanthin was the most commonest material which was not mentioned in any of the AREDS formula in the AREDS study. And it was present in various concentration ranging from 2 milligram to 6 milligram to 10 milligram. So I would like to conclude saying that this is not an exhaustive list, as this was the samples which were given by the pharma companies. Maybe there are more brands which have better or exact concentration. And secondly, the timeline of the products is also a matter. As I speak to you, I realize that there are 4 more brands now available in the market which comply to the AREDS formula. So basically, whenever we are in OPD, this is what we are presented to us, and everyone will mention that it is for age-related macular degeneration and as per AREDS formulation. But they forget that the concentration is not as per AREDS. The constituents are as per AREDS formulation. So as physicians, I would like to give this message that we have to be more aware of the constituents and the concentration. The pharma companies may or may not quote correctly because their claims can be at times dubious, and our awareness will help us pass on the benefits to our patients. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. That is a very wonderful analysis that you've given us. Most of us are very confused about what goes on and what not. I hope there are no financial disclosures that you have to make, because
absolutely not.
Great, sir, because you've taken names, so it's better that we get that out of the way.
There was no this. If their names weren't been there, I would have said 10 brands.
Just a technicality, sir.
That's absolutely.
It is open to the judges, please.
Just want to mention one small thing. Even if we are prescribing these drugs to the patient, it's not that easy to see the patient compliance, because many times you just prescribe them but they are really taking those drugs or not, whether they are regularly taking, not taking. All these things are not that easy to judge on the OPD basis.
Absolutely, sir.
Dr. Anuj, could you stop sharing your screen, please?
Sure.
It was pretty self-explanatory, your paper. So we'll go ahead with Dr. Natarajan, sir.
Yes.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. How are you?
Session, we are doing well, sir. I hope you're doing well.
Wonderful, wonderful.
I hope the Roti Bank is going great.
Yes.
Yeah.
Everywhere I have Roti Bank.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Because we are serving 11,000 people daily.
Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, sir.
Hello, Avinash. How are you? Long time.
Hi, sir.
You are in Mumbai and I'm not able to see you. Yes. So, can I start?
Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
Okay. So, can see my screen now? Are you able to see my screen? Whatever.
Yes, yes, sir. Make it full screen, sir. Full screen.
Yeah.
Okay.
So my talk is on our experience with offline AI in detecting diabetic retinopathy by semi-skilled health worker in Municipal Corporation of Greater Mumbai clinics. Thank my co-author, and nothing to financially disclose. And diabetic retinopathy is one of the leading cause of blindness in diabetic population. And the global prevalence of diabetes mellitus is estimated to be 9.3%, expected to rise by 10.3% by 2030. And India has around 77 million diabetics, which is the second highest number of diabetics in the world, with about 58% not diagnosed with diabetes at all. An institutional review board approval was obtained. Study conducted across 174 dispensaries of the Municipal Corporation of Greater Mumbai was screened, and informed consent was taken. In a prospective cross-sectional study, known diabetics visiting the MCGM dispensaries were screened, semi-skilled workers trained in imaging, and use of AI and patient counseling. The Remedio non-mediatic fundus on phone camera was used to capture fundus image, and the so captured were subjected to automated analysis by the Medios AI, a proprietary software. And the AI was run offline on the smartphone to detect referable diabetic retinopathy on image by the skilled, semi-skilled worker. And you can see the social worker putting drops, and only 1% tropic image we put if they don't get a good image. Pre-camp is a camp information was sent 1 month prior to dispensaries and medical officers, which is approved by the municipal commissioner and the various executive health officer. Counseling of all diabetic patients. Fortunately, Mumbai Corporation gives free diabetic medicine, so we screen them for retinopathy. Written informed consent, preliminary details such as age, sex. Pupils were dilated using single drop of 1% tropic mat based on the NHS study where millions have been done with no problem. And fundus imaging was done by semi-skilled worker who was like a room boy or anybody who do no need for education, who are trained with one skill of using the phone, the smartphone based fundus camera. We are also having a MOU with the Skill Development Corporation. The device was also equipped with an offline AI algorithm for diagnosing referable diabetic retinopathy with a severity of a moderate NPDR or more. And the images were uploaded on the cloud storage and were graded by veterinary surgeon into moderate and severe non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy and proliferative diabetic retinopathy apart from the AI. The AI algorithm was run offline on the smartphone by the semi-skilled worker who immediately after the image acquisition, and the offline automated analysis graded these images as referable diabetic retinopathy and no diabetic retinopathy, and class activation mapping and lesions which are detected by the AI. And I think this is the only offline AI which is available. So I feel we are ahead of the other online AIs available. So you can see here the early diabetic retinopathy changes photograph and asymptomatic retinal hemorrhage, and you can see the blue mask, which actually detects by color and with the machine learning. And the images are loaded in the mobile itself, so that there's no need for internet and there's no need for electricity because you can charge the infrared device, and both can be taken either used as a handheld or as a slit lamp attachment. So in our study, the blue, which mentioned 29% diabetic retinopathy detected, and the orange one 30 could not be graded due to cataract, and then the green is the other eye condition, which is about 32%. 2,241 diabetics were screened, and of these 506 subjects were detected by And then 147 were detected to have diabetic retinopathy by the AI, while 197 images could not be because of cataract, and 162 were detected with other eye conditions. So the discussion is the current study uses a public-private partnership model for diabetic retinopathy screening to use the resources from both sectors in best possible way to increase the efficiency of screening by using the already existing government infrastructure for diagnosing diabetes. The diabetic population can be easily targeted for screening, and the results from the study showed that this model can be an ideal tool for community screening, as it does not require the presence of ophthalmologists at the screening site, and the ophthalmologist can view the images from his or her office to diagnose retinopathy and reports conveyed to the patient. Conclusion: the AI gives a real-time presumptive diagnosis, cost-effective model. It can be easily integrated in the national program for control of non-communicable diseases, making diabetic retinopathy screening accessible to all. And this is the various references for this paper. And this quickly I'll show a video where
in order to ensures high quality.
So this is how you have to focus the retina photograph, and you can see that by anybody can, no need for education, only training, and then the right eye, left eye has been marked, and then using the offline AI software, then they can be referred to the patients. So thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for a wonderful presentation. Can this be integrated with the telemedicine aspect of it, sir? So somebody sitting at a higher center can look at it?
Definitely. Actually, that's what we have done in this study. Apart from the offline AI, we also used our ophthalmologist consultant to go through the images later, compared it, and we also published this in the initial one in the JAMA. The second one is coming in IGO, where the detectable diabetic retinopathy or referable diabetic retinopathy is almost 100% sensitive. So it can be used as a teleophthalmology, definitely, because the only reason we are recommending this continuously for India is where we have 6,47,000 villages. And I want somebody to have a camera, and maybe women empowerment. Even in Maharashtra, there are women who are actually, along with the people, where the husband drinks or takes some type of marijuana in a different form in the villages. And instead of wasting time and not being an example for the children, they can have contribute to the health of Maharashtra. So I'm actually making a program called Diabetic Blind Free Maharashtra, taking this, and we have an MOU with the government of Maharashtra with Palghar. When Dr. Deepak Sawant was health minister, we have done that. We are working still. And with Corona, we had some problem, but we are now again restarting. I wish we are also trying to work with Dr. Anil Kulkarni sir in Sangli, in Nasurbai Wadi is a village where almost 100% are diabetic. We want to start that. And anyhow, I think we will do it. And we are now covering all slums of Mumbai and all the BMC centers. And we are doing it totally free. Thanks to, we don't have financial interest, not directly connected. But because of the All India Ophthalmic Society, and we wrote a project, we got funding from Tata Trust for getting cameras. And whenever we need, we take it from the Remedio. There's no financial interest, nothing.
Thank you, sir.
Congratulations, Dr. Yes, Dr. Natarajan, sir. Yes, congratulations. You are doing a good work.
Thank you,
yes, Arvind, you must be doing. They are doing this diabetes screening, their telemedicine. They are doing for so many years. And another thing, sir, as you said, now they have come out with the new thing, AI in glaucoma.
Yes.
They have done a tie-up with VIT, Vellore Institute.
Yes, yes.
And they have made one equipment, and with that they are doing glaucoma screening also. Just like what you are doing, they are already doing. So as you said, people are now coming up with eradication of the diseases at the grassroots level. And as you said, even non-technical persons, they can help us.
Correct. No, but help, we can give them a job opportunity.
That's
room boy can do the photograph, any diabetologist clinic. We need the camera. The only thing I highlight in this is they are using earlier, I think, in Arvind, because I'm the president of Teleophthalmic Society, and Dr. Kim is the president-elect, and Dr. Rajiv Raman is the vice president now. So what I'm saying is we are all working together, and we are also part of the Telemedicine Society of India. So I agree that Dr. Nam is the pioneer in teleophthalmology, and Dr. Kim, and followed by Shankar Nethralaya. And now we want Maharashtra to lead.
Yes, definitely, sir. Definitely. Go ahead, sir. Thank you.
Even though I am from Madurai, I am born
I
in
know, sir. எனக்கு தெரியும், sir. நல்லா தெரியும், sir.
Very
நல்லா தெரியும், sir. நல்லா தெரியும், sir.
Okay.
Thank you, sir, for a wonderful presentation.
Thank
We'll
you.
go ahead with the next speaker, Dr. Rishikesh Aradi.
Yes, sir.
Please switch on your video and you can start sharing your screen.
Good afternoon, sir. Today's my topic is intravitreal brolucizumab as a treatment modality for recalcitrant wet AMD. Wet age-related macular degeneration, also known as exudative or neovascular AMD, primarily affects the macula and is the most common cause of central visual impairment and blindness among elderly individuals in developed countries. Vascular endothelial growth factor drives the development of choroidal neovascularization, where new vessels grow under or through the RP via breaks in the Brooks membrane. Regular administration of the intravitreal anti-VEGF medications may prevent blindness in most of these patients. Anti-VEGF therapy has now become the standard of care for the treatment of wet AMD. There are currently 4 available intravitreal anti-VEGF therapies, that is pegaptinib, bevacizumab, ranibizumab, and aflibercept. While the initially approved agent is pegaptinib has comparatively reduced potency, presumably because of the targeting only the VEGF 165 isoform. How can Harrier phase 3 clinical trials showed a non-inferiority and comparable efficacy of brolucizumab to aflibercept, but with the advantage of longer maintenance dose interval of every 12 weeks. Brolucizumab is FDA approved in October 2019 anti-VEGF drug for wet AMD. The regimen includes the 3 injections to be given monthly, followed by maintenance dose to be given 2 to 3 monthly until resolution of symptoms. Brolucizumab binds and inhibits the 3 major isoforms of VEGF-A, isoforms of VEGF-A, that is VEGF 110, 121, and 165, and prevents interaction with receptors VEGF receptor 1 and VEGF receptor 2, suppressing the endothelial cell proliferation, neovascularization, and vascular permeability. The recommended dose regimen is 6 mg by intravitreal injection monthly for the first 3 doses, then once every 8 to 12 weeks. I included the patient of wet AMD, age more than 40 years, wet AMD previously treated and non-responsive to other anti-VEGF drugs, and excluded the dry AMD, other causes of vision loss, where anti-VEGF are used, like in diabetic retinopathy, retinal vein occlusion, and cystoid macular edema, and inflammation, that is anterior and posterior uveitis. All patients underwent detailed examination. Assessment included the visual acuity, refraction, slit lamp examination, IOP, fundus examination by slit lamp biomicroscopy, IDO, and OCT. In my first case, the 65-year-old male, known case of choroidal neovascularization associated with ARMD, left eye having visual acuity of 636, was started on intravitreal aflibercept injection. 2 intravitreal aflibercept injections were given. No improvement was seen in the subsequent follow-up in visual acuity, CMT, that is central macular thickness, and subretinal fluid. And following which, patient was started on intravitreal brolucizumab injection. 1 month follow-up showed no improvement in visual acuity, but improved CMT from 443 microns to 297 microns and decreased SRF. Follow-up after second dose of brolucizumab injection showed improved visual acuity to 618 and improved CMT to 273 microns and resorption of SRF. In case 2, the 58-year-old male, a known case of wet AMD, complaining of decreased vision in his right eye with visual acuity of finger counting 3 meters, was given 2 intravitreal injections of ranibizumab, following which at the end of 2 months, there was no improvement in visual acuity, CMT, and SRF levels. This time, however, the patient was started on brolucizumab intravitreal injections. At 2 weeks of post-injection, the visual acuity slightly improved to finger counting 4 meters and CMT improved by 52 microns, and at 4 weeks of post-injection, visual acuity was stable at finger counting 4 meters, and OCT showed significantly improved SRF, and the CMT decreased by 57 microns compared to pre-brolucizumab baseline. In third case, the 89-year-old male patient with 10-year history of macular degeneration in right eye was initially treated with monthly ranibizumab intravitreal injection and then switched to monthly aflibercept intravitreal injections. Then visual acuity fluctuated between finger counting 3 meter and 4 meter. The patient was then started on brolucizumab intravitreal injection. Follow-up of first brolucizumab injection, the patient's vision increased to finger counting 5 meter and OCT showed a CMT reduction of 19 microns. And follow-up of second brolucizumab injection, visual acuity remained stable at finger counting 5 meter. OCT showed a CMT improved by 22 microns and SRF resolved compared to pre-brolucizumab baseline. Here the OCT photographs of the first case. Follow-up OCT after aflibercept injection. The visual acuity was not improved. It was 6/36, and here we can see the central macular thickness is increased 443 microns, and the SRF is also present. And then patient had started on intravitreal brolucizumab injection. Then 1 month follow-up of OCT scan after brolucizumab injection shows that the central macular thickness decreases to 297 microns, and the SRF is also reduced, and the visual acuity here remains stable. But after the second brolucizumab injection, the central macular thickness again decreased to 273 microns, and SRF is totally resolved, and the visual acuity improved to the 680. Here in results, the visual acuity in first case is significantly improved. In second and third cases, the visual acuity not significantly improved, slightly improved, but CMT in all 3 cases is decreased, and SRF is also reduced in all 3 cases after brolucizumab injection. And brolucizumab discussion. Brolucizumab has been FDA approved for the treatment of wet AMD since October 8, 2019. In our case series, we use the drug to treat patient still showing persistent activity while on other anti-VEGF agents. Brolucizumab has better penetrance into the retinal tissue because of its smaller size, that is 226 kDa, compared to the other anti-VEGF drugs. This is reflected in our observation that the patient showed improved responses with decreased SRF as well as the decreased CMT in all cases. Visual acuity also dramatically improved in 1 out of 3 patients, but only slightly improved and remains stable in all 3 cases. Conclusion is our case series shows that brolucizumab is an efficient intravitreal anti-VEGF drug for wet AMD in cases which have previously been treated with other anti-VEGF but not responded satisfactorily. In our cases, brolucizumab showed definite improvement in CMT and resorption of SRF on OCT. Visual acuity may or may not dramatically improve, but it remains stable until 6 months of follow-up. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Total number of patients you studied were only 3, right?
Yes, sir.
So you don't have a large population to say what are the long-term effects and basically its efficacy. In your 3 patients, maximum two injections were sufficient. What was your experience?
Only 2 injections were given, but after that we'll continue the maintenance dose after 2 to 3 months. So is new drug, the brolucizumab, so the patient samples were less.
You said basically you used this drug after the first 2 drugs, aflibercept and the other one failed. Would you recommend this drug as a primary treatment for wet AMD?
No, sir. First, we'll try the other ranibizumab or aflibercept. If that, because all drugs decreases the CMT, but the longer duration of interval is the advantage of brolucizumab. So if the other drugs fails to increase vision or decrease CMT. So we can try brolucizumab.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions?
No.
So we'll conclude this session here. Thank you, Dr. Abhijit, Dr. Venkatesh, and Dr. Ingole for having judged this session. I thank all the speakers who have spoken. I especially thank Dr. Natarajan for giving his time and gracing this. And I hand over the hall to the speakers of the next session, Dr. Sumit, Dr. Swapnil, Dr. Sonal. We are sorry for having overshot our time, and please go ahead with your session. Thank you.
Thank you, Amay.
Thank you, Amay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Abhijit sir and Ingole.